"Just kill me fast," she said. Those were the first words the giant cowboy heard when he found a blanket in the dust. When he pulled it open, he froze. Inside wasn't a thief or a bandit. It was a starving young woman clutching a newborn baby. The storm was closing in, the church bell echoing far off, and the cowboy knew one thing. If he left her, she would die before dawn. But bringing her into his cabin meant war with his own town. Neighbors who whispered, deputies who threatened, and soldiers who claimed her child as government property. She carried a secret papers that could clear her dead husband's name, but also paint a target on her back. And as rumors spread, every step the cowboy took bound him tighter to her fate. Would mercy cost him everything he owned? Even his life? Or could this fragile mother and her child be the family he never knew he was praying for? When the law, the town, and the army all close in, will he have the courage to stand, or will the blanket close for good? Every story I share leads with love for people, for healing, for the things we sometimes forget to say out loud. Got the wind whistled through the pines, sharp and cold against Jedediah Boone's weathered face. His horse's hooves crunched against the rocky mountain trail as he led the tired animal home. After 3 months on the cattle drive, both man and beast were bone-weary. Jed pulled his collar higher against the biting wind. Tasting snow in the air, the setting sun painted long shadows across the trail. His line shack lay another hour ahead if they kept a steady pace. The horse nickered softly, and Jed patted its sweaty neck. "Almost there, old friend," he murmured. A weak sound caught his attention, so faint he nearly missed it over the wind's moan. Jed halted, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. The cry came again, human this time. From behind a thick patch of sage, tying his horse to a sturdy pine, Jed approached carefully. His boots made no sound on the rocky ground, years of tracking having taught him to move silent as a mountain cat. The bundle he spotted looked like discarded rags at first, wrapped in a weather-beaten blanket. Then it moved, Yet's breath caught in his throat. An Apache woman lay curled around something, her face drawn with pain and fever. Her cracked lips moved, forming words he barely heard. "Just kill me fast." The words hit him like a physical blow. Jed dropped to one knee beside her, his big hands gentle as he touched her shoulder. "No, ma'am," he said softly. "I ain't here to harm you." Her eyes, bright with fever, searched his face. The fear in them made his heart ache. Slowly, carefully, he reached for the edge of the blanket. The woman tensed but didn't resist as he pulled it back. A tiny face, blue tinged from cold, emerged from the folds. The infant couldn't have been more than a day old, its breaths shallow but steady. "Lord have mercy," Jed whispered doubt without hesitation. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around mother and child. "Stay here," he told her, though he doubted she could move far. "I'm making a fire." Years of frontier life had taught him efficiency. Within minutes, he had a small blaze, going sheltered from the wind by a natural hollow in the rocks. He retrieved his saddlebags, pulling out a tin of beef broth he'd been saving for supper. While the broth heated, he filled his canteen from a nearby spring. The woman's eyes never left him as he worked. When he held the water to her lips, she drank in small sips as if afraid it might be taken away. "My name's Jed," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Jed Boone, you're safe here." He spooned warm broth into her mouth, one careful spoonful at a time. Some color returned to her face as she ate. The infant stirred, making tiny mewling sounds. Jed looked at the darkening sky, then at the woman's exhausted face. His line shack was small, barely big enough for one, but it was warm and dry. The decision wasn't hard to make. "Storm's coming," he said, gathering his supplies. "My place ain't far. It ain't much, but it's better than freezing out here." Fear flickered across her face again, but something else too, hope, maybe, or simple resignation. She nodded once. Jed fashioned a sling from his spare shirt, helping her secure the baby against her chest. Then, with infinite care, he lifted her in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, light as a child herself. The horse snorted when Jed approached with his burden, but stood steady as he draped the woman across the saddle. He gathered the reins in one hand, keeping the other on her back to steady her. "Ain't far now," he repeated, though he wasn't sure if she could still hear him. Her eyes had drifted closed, but her arms remained locked around her child. The first. Snowflakes began to fall as Jed led his horse through the gathering dusk. Each step was measured, careful on the treacherous trail. The wind grew fiercer, driving the snow sideways, but Jed kept moving. He'd seen too many people die from exposure in these mountains to leave anyone to that fate. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. Reading from her worn Bible, "I was a stranger, and ye took me in." He hadn't thought about those words in years, not since losing his brother in the war. But tonight, they came back clear as mountain spring water. The woman stirred slightly, murmuring something in Apache that he couldn't understand. Jed adjusted his grip on her, making sure she was secure. "Hold on," he said. "Just hold on a little longer." Above them, the clouds thickened, promising a long night of snow. But Jed Boone kept walking, one steady step after another, leading his horse through the gathering storm. Behind him, the fire he'd built flickered and died, leaving only tracks in the fresh snow to mark their passing. The storm descended like a hungry wolf, fierce and merciless. Yet's fingers grew numb as he secured the woman and child on his horses, broad back, tucking his heavy wool coat around them both. The infant whimpered softly, a sound nearly lost in the howling wind. "Easy now," he murmured, both to the horse and his passengers. Snow pelted them sideways, coating his hat and shoulders in white. The horse's ears flicked back and forth. Nervous at carrying such an unusual burden, Jed kept one hand on the woman's back as he led them through the gathering dark. The familiar trail seemed strange now, transformed by snow and shadows. His boots crunched through fresh powder, finding secure footing by instinct more than sight. The wind cut through his remaining layers like a knife, but he barely noticed. The cold. His whole world had narrowed to the steady rhythm of walking, the reassuring warmth of the horse beside him, and the precious cargo it carried. After what felt like hours, the dark bulk of his land shack emerged from the swirling snow. It wasn't much, just a simple one-room cabin with a stone chimney, but right now it looked like heaven itself. Almost there, he said, though he wasn't sure if the woman could hear him over the storm. The horse stomped gratefully under the cabin's small overhang, while Jed worked the frozen door latch. Inside, darkness pressed close around them. He fumbled with his matches, finally getting a lantern lit. The warm glow revealed bare walls, a narrow bed, and a stone hearth with cold ashes. Moving carefully, he lifted the woman down. She was light in his arms, too light, like a bird with hollow bones. He settled her close to the hearth, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Every line of her body spoke of tension, despite her exhaustion. "No," she whispered as he reached. "For the baby." Her arms tightened protectively around the bundle. "Need to get a fire going," Jed explained quietly. "Get you both warm proper?" He stepped back, giving her space, and busied himself with kindling and logs he kept stacked by the hearth. Soon, a small flame caught and grew. The woman watched his every move, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. When he approached with a pot of water for heating, she pressed herself against the wall. "White men never help my people," she said, her voice barely audible. "Why?" Jed paused in his work, considering her words. He'd seen enough frontier violence to understand her suspicion. "Can't speak for others," he said finally. "Just know leaving folks to die ain't right." He warmed the last of his trail broth, pouring it into a tin cup. This time, when he approached, he set the cup down within her reach and stepped back. "Eat if you want to live," he said simply. "Your little one needs you strong." Something flickered in her eyes, a mother's fierce will to survive, perhaps. Slowly, she reached for the cup. Her hands shook as she drank, but she finished every drop. Through the long night, Jed kept the fire fed and watched over his unexpected guests. The woman dozed fitfully, waking at every sound. The baby nursed and slept, tiny fingers curled tight. "Like flower buds?" Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin grew warm and almost peaceful. Dawn arrived with sudden brightness, sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. The storm had passed, leaving the world wrapped in pristine white. Jed had just finished brewing coffee when the woman spoke again. "I am Naomi," she said, her voice stronger now. "Naomi Tenaya." She adjusted her hold on the sleeping infant, studying Yet's face. "My husband, he was scout for army. Good man, honest man." Her words caught for a moment. "They said he helped raiders. Lies. They hung him, then burned our lodge." I ran, Yet's hands stilled on the coffee pot. He'd heard similar stories before. Good. Men destroyed by bad judgment or simple malice. The injustice of it sat like a stone in his gut. "I am sorry," he said, knowing the words were inadequate. Naomi's eyes dropped to her child. I thought, better to die in mountains than be caught. But then she touched the baby's cheek softly. Then she came, and I could not. Jed moved slowly, asking permission with his eyes before kneeling beside. Then, the infant stirred, and without thinking, he reached out one finger. Tiny fingers wrapped around it with surprising strength. "May I?" he asked. After a long moment, Naomi nodded. Jed gathered the baby with infinite care, cradling her as if she were made of pure gold. She weighed almost nothing in his large hands, but he could feel the strong heartbeat, the vital warmth of new life. In the morning light, her skin glowed like burnished copper. Little Dawn, he named her silently, watching her face scrunch in sleepy contentment. Naomi watched him hold her child, and something in her expression softened slightly. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. When he handed the baby back, their eyes met briefly. In that moment, Jed felt the weight of what he'd taken on settle around his shoulders. 2 lives now depended on his protection. Strangely, the thought didn't burden him. Instead, he felt more anchored than he had in years, as if he'd finally found something worth any price to defend. The morning sun streamed stronger through the window, turning the cabin's rough interior to gold. And Jed Boone knew with quiet certainty that his life had changed forever. Morning light painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pearl and gold. Jed pulled his coat tight against the chill and stepped out into the pristine whiteness. His boots crunched through the fresh powder as he made his way to the woodpile. The familiar weight of the axe settled in his hands as he began splitting. Logs dot inside the cabin. He could see Naomi through the frosted window, sitting near the stove with her baby. The sight made his strokes more purposeful. These weren't just chores anymore, they were keeping. 2 more souls alive through the mountain winter. The rhythm of the axe matched his breathing. Split, stack, split, stack. His muscles warmed to the work despite the cold. When he had enough wood to last a few days, he loaded his arms and carried the first batch inside. Naomi looked up briefly as he entered, then returned to her task. She had found his torn shirt among his things and was mending it with small, precise stitches. Her fingers moved surely despite her weakness, the bone needle flashing in the morning light. "Much obliged," Jed said quietly, noting how near. Work was compared to his own clumsy attempts at mending. She acknowledged him with a slight nod, her dark hair falling forward to shield her face. After stacking the wood, Jed pulled on his heavy gloves. "Need to check the cattle," he explained. "Won't be gone long." He had only 3 head in the sheltered valley below his cabin, but they needed looking after, especially after the storm. The cold bit deeper as he made his way down the snowy slope. His few cattle huddled in the lee of a rock face, their breath steaming in the morning air. All 3 were present and healthy, though their winter coats were crusted with ice. Jed broke the frozen crust on their water hole and scattered some hay before heading back. His next task was melting snow for water. He filled several buckets with clean snow and set them near the stove to melt slowly. The cabin's single room had grown almost warm, and the baby slept peacefully in a nest of blankets. As he worked, Naomi finished with his shirt and held it up to inspect her stitching. The tear had been along the shoulder seam, but now it was nearly invisible. She folded the shirt carefully and set it aside. "Thank you," Jed said. genuine appreciation in his voice. Better than I could manage. The day passed quietly as they settled into an uneasy coexistence. When evening approached, Jed prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. They ate in silence until Naomi spoke, her voice low but clear. "They hunt me still," she said, eyes fixed on her plate. "The soldiers who killed my husband, and others men who take money to track people." Her fingers tightened on her spoon. "They say I know things. Army secrets my husband told me, but he never." She trailed off, shaking her head, Yet's jaw clenched as he listened. He had seen such injustice before. Good people ground under the wheels of others' greed or fear. The thought of mercenaries hunting this young mother and her infant made his stomach turn. "You're safe here," he said finally, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "Ain't many folks know about this valley." After they finished eating, Jed showed Naomi how to operate his iron stove. "Draft here controls the heat," he explained, demonstrating with the metal lever. "Too open, fire burns too hot. Too closed, it smothers." She watched attentively, then touched his hand where it rested on the stove. He started at the contact, but she was focused on the way he favored his fingers. "Your hand pains you," she said. It wasn't a question. "I can help." She moved to her bundle of belongings and brought out a small packet of dried bark. "Willow medicine? Good for pain." Jed watched as she crushed the bark and steeped it in hot water. The sharp, clean scent filled the cabin. When she handed him the cup, he sipped carefully. The taste was bitter, but not unpleasant. "My grandmother taught me healing ways," she explained, her voice softening with memory. She said knowledge is a gift to be shared. As if on cue, the baby began to fuss. Naomi moved to pick her up, but Jed was closer. "May I?" he asked. At her nod, he carefully lifted the infant. The baby felt impossibly small in his large hands. He tried to remember how his mother had soothed his younger siblings, awkwardly rocking back and forth. His movements were stiff at first, but gradually he found a gentle rhythm to his surprise. The baby's cries softened to quiet coos. She grabbed his finger with her tiny hand, and something in his chest tightened. When he glanced up, he caught the faintest smile on Naomi's face, the first he had seen. It transformed her features, showing the young woman she must have been before grief and hardship had carved such deep lines later. As darkness gathered outside, Jed added wood to the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Naomi had fallen asleep in a rocking chair, her baby nestled against her chest. The sight stirred something deep inside him, something he had thought long buried, without conscious thought. Jed found himself praying. It wasn't like the formal prayers of his childhood, all thee and thou. This was simpler. Barar. "Protect them, Lord. Show me the way to help them." The words came rusty with disuse. He hadn't prayed since losing his brother in the war. But watching Naomi and her child, something of his old faith flickered back to life. Like a spark catching in dry tinder, he remained by the fire, keeping watch as mother and child. The willow tea had eased the ache in his hand, but it had done something else too. Like the mended shirt and the shared knowledge of the stove, it was a small bridge built between two wounded souls. Trust, he knew, would come slowly if at all. But for now, in the firelit quiet, it felt like enough dawn broke crisp and clear over the mountain valley. Jed saddled his horse early, checking the cinch twice before mounting. He hadn't planned on going to town so soon, but their supplies wouldn't last long with 3 mouths to feed. "I'll be back before sundown," he told Naomi, who stood in the doorway with her baby wrapped tight against the morning chill. She nodded, her eyes following him as he rode away. The trail to town wound through stands of pine and across snow-dusted meadows. His horse's hooves left clear tracks in the fresh powder, and Jed frowned at how easily they could be followed. He'd need to be more careful in the future. The sun had climbed halfway to noon when the first buildings of Silver Creek came into view. The town wasn't much, a general store, saloon, smithy, and a scatter of homes, but it was the only settlement. For 30 miles. Jed tied his horse outside the general store, stamping his boots clean before entering. The store bell jangled as he stepped inside. Old Tom Harper looked up from his ledger, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. "Morning, Jed. Ain't seen you." "In a spell. Morning." Jed moved through the store, gathering what he needed: flour, beans, coffee, salt pork. He paused at a shelf of small toys, his rough hands gentle as he picked up a cloth doll with yarn hair. The price was dear 50 cents, but something in him couldn't leave it behind. Tom's eyebrows rose as he totaled the unusual amount of supplies. "Stocking up mighty heavy for one man," he observed, wrapping the items in brown paper. Jed said nothing, counting out coins from his cattle drive pay. The doll he tucked carefully into his coat pocket as he loaded his saddlebags. He felt eyes on him. Frank Dawson, one of the bigger ranchers in the valley, lounged against the hitching post with two of his hands. "Say, Boone," Dawson drawled, pushing back his hat. "Word is you're keeping company up at your place. That Apache squaw your woman now." The words carried clear across the street. Several townspeople slowed their steps, eager for gossip. Yet's hands stilled on the leather straps, but he didn't turn. "Heard tell she's mighty pretty," Dawson pressed, clearly enjoying his audience. "Though can't say I'd want one of them in my bed." Jed pivoted slowly. He didn't speak, but something in his eyes made Dawson's smile fade. The rancher straightened, hand drifting toward his gun belt for a long moment. The street was silent except for the creak of signboards in the wind. Then Jed mounted his horse, turned it carefully, and rode away without a word. The whispers followed him out of town, like autumn leaves skittering across the dirt. He knew they wouldn't stop there. Gossip traveled faster than horses in these parts. By sundown, every ranch and homestead for miles would be talking about Jed Boone and his Indian woman. The ride home seemed longer, his thoughts as heavy as the loaded saddlebags. The sun was lowering behind the mountains when he finally reached the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the window he could see Naomi tending the fire, her baby swaddled beside her. She looked up as he entered, reading something in his face. "The town knows," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Jed nodded, unloading his supplies. Talk started. It won't stop neither. Naomi's shoulders stiffened, but she kept working, adding small sticks to build the fire's heart. "It was bound to happen," she said finally. "Your people see a man and woman living together. They make assumptions." "Ain't right," Jed muttered. But they both knew it didn't matter what was right. The story would grow, twist, take on a life of its own. He remembered the doll and pulled it from his coat. "Got something for the little one." He held it out. Awkwardly, Naomi took the doll, running her fingers over its simple dress and yarn braids. For a moment, her eyes shimmered. "Thank you," she whispered. She tucked it next to her sleeping baby, who immediately curled tiny fingers around it. As evening settled in, Naomi began preparing cornbread. The familiar motions of mixing and kneading seemed to calm her. Then, so softly Jed almost missed it, she began to speak. "The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Jed looked up sharply. "That's scripture." She nodded, working the dough with sure hands. 1 Samuel, chapter 16, verse 7. The missionaries taught us to read from the good book. Some thought it would make us forget our own ways. A slight smile touched her lips. "Instead, I found truth that spoke to both." "How so?" Jed asked, surprised by his own curiosity. "The Creator sees beyond the things that divide us: color, tribe, blood. He sees our hearts, our spirits." She shaped the cornbread carefully, like when Samuel chose David to be king. Everyone saw a shepherd boy, but God saw what was inside. Her words struck something deep in Yet's chest. He remembered his mother reading those same verses, her Bible worn smooth from use. He turned away from faith after losing his brother, believing God had turned away first. But hearing the ancient words in Naomi's voice, seeing how they brought her comfort even after all she'd suffered, it made him wonder. He didn't speak of these thoughts aloud, but something in him softened like frozen ground beginning to thaw. They ate their supper in comfortable silence. the baby sleeping peacefully beside them, her new doll clutched tight. Outside, the wind carried whispers of approaching winter. But inside the cabin was warm, filled with the scent of fresh bread and wood smoke. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight they had this moment of peace, a small family formed not by blood or law, but by mercy and need. Sunday dawned bright and cold, frost glittering on the cabin windows. Jed stood before his cracked mirror, fumbling with his good shirt buttons. He hadn't worn his Sunday clothes since coming to the valley, but today was different. Today they would face the town together. Naomi emerged from behind the curtain he'd hung for privacy, wearing her best dress, a simple blue cotton garment she'd carefully mended. She'd braided her long black hair and tied it with a faded ribbon. The baby, wrapped in a clean blanket, cooed softly in her arms. "You sure about this?" Jed asked, adjusting his collar. Naomi nodded, her chin lifted. "If we hide, they win. Besides," she added softly, "it's the Lord's day." The ride into town was quiet, their borrowed wagon creaking through the morning stillness. Jed had hitched up both his horses to pull it, wanting to spare Naomi and the baby the jarring of a saddle. He'd lined a wooden crate with blankets too. Make a proper seat. Silver Creek's little white church sat on a gentle rise at the edge of town. As they approached, Jed could see other wagons and riders converging on the building. People in their Sunday best climbed the steps. Ben stopped and stared as Jed helped Naomi down from the wagon. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the gathering crowd like wind through dry grass. Some folks turned their backs. Others watched with open curiosity. A few children pointed until their mothers hushed them. Jed kept his hand at Naomi's elbow as they climbed the church steps. The baby stirred but stayed quiet, as if sensing the tension. Inside the sanctuary, smelled of pine wood and lamp oil. Sunlight streamed through simple glass windows, catching dust motes and golden beams. They chose a pew near the back, but there was no hiding. The congregation's heads turned like compass needles, fixing on them. Some women gathered their skirts closer, as if Naomi's presence might soil the fabric. Others simply glared. Reverend Matthews stood at his pulpit, shuffling papers and frowning. He was a thin man with graying temples who'd come west to serve the growing territory. As the organ wheezed out the opening hymn, Jed noticed the reverends, gaze repeatedly returning to their pew. The service began as usual prayers, hymns, announcements of sick folks needing visits. Then Reverend Matthews cleared his throat and opened his Bible. His voice carried clear through the wooden sanctuary. Today's sermon comes from 2 Corinthians, chapter 6, verse 14. "Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers." Yet, shoulders tensed. Beside him, Naomi went very still. The Reverend continued, his words growing sharper. "The Lord commands us to keep ourselves separate from those who walk in darkness, those who cling to heathen ways and savage customs." A soft rustle of fabric cut through his words. Naomi had risen to her feet, her baby cradled close. For a moment, Jed thought she meant to leave. Instead, she began to speak, her voice trembling, but clear. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The sanctuary fell silent. Even the Reverend stood speechless, his mouth half open. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." Naomi's voice grew stronger. With each word, "He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake." Sunlight caught the tears on her cheeks, but she continued steady and sure. "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Some of the congregation had bowed their heads. Others watched with wide eyes as this Apache woman recited the beloved psalm from memory, her accent lending the familiar words new beauty. "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over." Mrs. Wilson, the baker's wife, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Old Tom Harper from the store nodded slowly, his weathered face thoughtful. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." The last words hung in the air like morning mist. Naomi sat down, drawing her baby closer. Jed wanted to take her hand, but wasn't sure if he should. Instead, he sat straighter, daring anyone to challenge her right to be there. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat several times before continuing his sermon. But the edge had gone from his voice. He spoke instead of God's infinite mercy and the mysteries of divine love. When the service ended, Jed expected everyone to hurry past them, but something had shifted. Mrs. Wilson approached first, holding out a wrapped loaf of fresh bread for the little one, she said softly, when she's old enough for solid food. Then Sarah Cooper, the seamstress, offered a bundle of clean white cloth. Every baby needs proper swaddling, she said, her smile hesitant but genuine. Not everyone came forward. Many still frowned or hurried past. But enough people stopped to speak a kind word or offer a small gift that Jed felt hope rising in his chest. These weren't grand gestures, but they were beginnings, tiny seeds of acceptance taking root out as they walked back to their wagon. Naomi's steps were lighter. Your people are not all against us, she whispered, adjusting the baby's blanket against the cooling air. Jed simply nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Pride and affection swelled within him as he watched her climb carefully into the wagon, holding their gifts close. She had shown more courage than any gunslinger he'd ever known, fighting not with bullets but with faith and dignity. The sun was high as they drove home, the horses' hooves raising small puffs of dust from the road. The baby slept peacefully, one tiny hand curled around the edge of her new blanket. Looking at them both, Jed realized that somewhere along the way, without quite noticing they had become his family, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Yet's yard as he worked on the broken corral fence. A board had split during the last storm, leaving a gap wide enough for curious cattle to push through. He'd been meaning to fix it for days, but other chores kept getting in the way. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. The old planks were stubborn, warped from years of weather. He gripped a loose board with his left hand, trying to wrench it free. The weathered wood suddenly gave way, sending a long splinter deep into his palm. "Dadgummit," he muttered, jerking his hand back. Blood welled up around the wooden shard buried in his flesh. Before he could even call out, Naomi appeared at his side, as if she'd been watching from the cabin window. She took one look at his hand and gestured toward the water pump. "Sit," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I will. Fetch what we need." Jed settled onto the rough wooden bench beside the pump, cradling his injured hand. Through the open cabin door, he could see the baby sleeping peacefully in her makeshift cradle, a sturdy wooden box lined with soft blankets. Naomi returned quickly with clean cloths and her medicine pouch, a worn leather bag that held her healing supplies. She worked with quiet efficiency, first washing his hand with pump water, then examining the splinter with gentle fingers. "This will hurt," she warned, producing a pair of small bone tweezers from her pouch. "Stay still." Her touch was sure and swift as she extracted the splinter. Jed barely had time to wince before it was done. She cleaned the wound again, then began grinding some dried herbs between two smooth stones. "Where'd you learn doctoring?" he asked, watching her work. "My grandmother was a healer," she replied, mixing the crushed herbs with a bit of clean water to make a paste. "She taught me many things before the soldiers came." She spread the medicine over his palm, then wrapped it carefully with strips of clean cloth. The paste had a sharp, clean smell that reminded him of mountain air. "That should keep infection away," she said, tying off the bandage. "But no more fence work today." Jed flexed his fingers carefully. The binding was neat and tight, professional as any doctor might do. "Much obliged," he said softly. Later that evening, after a simple supper of beans and cornbread, they sat by the fire. The baby slept nearby, making small dreaming sounds. Jed dozed in his chair, his bandaged hand resting on the arm, while Naomi mended one of his shirts. "Jedediah?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. He opened his eyes, instantly alert. She never used his full name unless something was troubling. Her Naomi set aside her sewing and glanced toward the window. as if checking for shadows. "There is something you should know," she said, her fingers working at the hem of her dress. Jed sat up straighter, watching as she carefully unpicked a few tiny stitches in the dress's lining. From the hidden pocket, she withdrew a folded paper, yellowed and worn at the creases. "My husband's pension document," she explained, smoothing it carefully. "Proof of his service to your army, his loyalty, and his death while under their flag." Jed leaned forward as she unfolded it. The official seals were clear, the signatures bold. It detailed her husband's service as a scout, his death in the line of duty, and most importantly, the pension owed to his widow. "This could protect you," he said slowly, understanding dawning. "You and the little one." Naomi nodded, her face grave. "Or get us killed. There are those who would rather see such proof destroyed than honor their debt to an Apache widow." The fire crackled in the silence as Jed absorbed her words. He thought of the hostility they'd faced in town, the whispers and glares. If there were people who didn't want her claims recognized, this document would indeed paint a target on their backs. "I have kept it hidden," she continued, moving it from place to place. But now she looked at him directly, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I ask if you will keep it safe. I trust no one else." The weight of her trust settled over him like a heavy blanket. He thought of all the dangers this simple piece of paper might bring soldiers, mercenaries, corrupt officials. Anyone who didn't want to admit that an Apache scout had died serving a country that now denied his widow justice. But looking at Naomi's face, at the sleeping baby, he knew his answer. "I'll guard it with my life," he said quietly. She pressed the document into his good hand, her fingers lingering for a moment. "I know," she whispered. Jed stood and went to the loose floorboard under his bed where he kept his most important papers. As he tucked the pension document away, he silently prayed he was doing right by her. The thought of anyone bringing harm to Naomi or the baby made his jaw clench. When he returned to his chair, Naomi had resumed her sewing, but her shoulders seemed lighter, as if sharing her burden had eased some of her fear. The fire burned low, casting warm shadows across the cabin's walls. They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in thought. Yet's bandaged hand throbbed gently, reminding him of her careful tending. Now she had trusted him with something far more precious than a wound her future. Her safety, her hope for justice. The baby stirred and whimpered. Naomi rose to tend her, humming a soft Apache lullaby. Watching them, Jed felt the full weight of his promise. He would protect them both, and the document that might give them a chance at a proper life. No matter what enemies might come, the mountain snow retreated slowly, leaving behind patches of mud and tender green shoots. As March gave way to April, the land awakened from its winter slumber. Morning frost still sparkled on the grass, but by midday, the warm sunshine coaxed new life from the thawing earth. Naomi knelt in the freshly turned soil of Yet's small garden plot, her fingers working methodically. She had convinced him to expand the growing space, explaining how her people had cultivated these same lands for generations. Now she carefully planted bean seeds in neat rows, showing him how to space them properly. "The beans will climb the corn when it grows tall," she explained, patting soil over another seed. "And the squash will spread below, keeping the ground cool and moist." Jed watched from where he was mending the cabin's roof, replacing shingles damaged by winter storms. The baby lay on a blanket in a patch of sunshine nearby, waving tiny fists at butterflies that danced above her head. "Reckon that's smarter than my way," he admitted, hammering another shingle into place. "Always planted everything separate-like." Naomi smiled, a rare expression that transformed her serious face. "Your people think everything must be in straight lines, divided from each other. But plants are like people, they grow stronger together." A happy squeal drew their attention to the baby, who had rolled onto her stomach and was trying to catch a yellow butterfly. Jed climbed down from the roof, brushing dust from his hands. "Speaking of growing," he said, reaching into his shirt pocket, "got something for the little one." He produced the small cloth doll he bought weeks ago in town, holding it somewhat awkwardly. The doll's painted face was simple but sweet, with black button eyes and red yarn for hair. Ain't much, he mumbled, suddenly self-conscious. But thought she might like it. Naomi watched as he knelt beside the baby, holding out the doll. The infant grabbed for it immediately, stuffing one of its legs into her mouth. Yet's large hands fluttered uncertainly, trying to adjust the doll's position. No, not for eating, little one, he said, attempting to redirect her interest. Instead, the baby grabbed his thumb, doll and all, and tried to gum that too. A look of complete bewilderment on Yet's face broke through Naomi's usual reserve. She laughed, a clear, bright sound that startled them both. After a moment, Jed joined in, his deep chuckle mixing with hers. Here, Naomi said, still smiling as she showed him how to hold the doll in front of the baby, dancing it gently. Like this. The peaceful moment shattered at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Jed stood quickly, positioning himself between Naomi and the trail. She scooped up the baby and retreated to the cabin's doorway, one hand clutching the child while the other reached for the knife hidden in her skirts. The rider who appeared was Will Hawkins, a neighboring rancher who grazed cattle in the valley below. He reined his horse to a stop, nodding curtly to Jed, while his eyes strayed to Naomi and the baby. "Boone," he greeted, not dismounting. "Need a word." Jed stepped forward, careful to keep himself between the rider and his cabin. "Speak your piece." Then, Hawkins shifted in his saddle, clearly uncomfortable. "Army patrol came through yesterday. They're looking for an Apache woman and infant. Say she's carrying stolen documents, might be working with raiders." "That's so." Yet's voice remained neutral, but his shoulders tensed. "They're offering a reward," Hawkins continued, watching Yet's face. $50 for information leading to their capture. "Appreciate the warning," Jed said, flatly. "But I ain't seen any Apache raiders around here." Hawkins' gaze drifted pointedly toward Naomi again. "Some folks in town been talking, Boone, about your situation here. My situation ain't their concern." "Maybe. Not," Hawkins frowned. "But if that woman's who they're looking for, harboring her could get you hung. Army don't take kindly to folks helping their enemies." "She ain't their enemy," Jed said, his voice hardening. "And I ain't harboring nothing but my own family." The word hung in the air between them. Hawkins studied Jed for a long moment, then shook his head. "Your choice, Boone, but them soldiers will be checking every homestead in the territory." "Might want to think on that." He gathered his reins. "For your own good." They watched in silence as Hawkins rode away. When the sound of hooves faded, Naomi stepped forward, the baby clutched tight against her chest. "He will tell them," she said quietly. "You know this?" Jed turned to face her, seeing the fear she tried to hide. Maybe not." "I have brought danger to your door," Naomi continued, her voice thick with guilt. "You should send us away?" "Before they come, I never meant to bring you ruin." "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. Jed gentled his voice. "You ain't bringing me ruin, and you ain't going nowhere. But the soldiers. Let them come." Jed stepped closer, resting one large hand on the baby's back. The infant turned at his touch, reaching for his finger with a toothless smile. "You and the child belong here now. I'll face what comes." Naomi looked up at him, searching his face. Why? Why risk everything for us? Jed was quiet for a moment, watching the baby play with his calloused finger. Finally, he spoke softly. "Because some things are worth the risk." The evening sun painted the mountains gold as they stood together, the baby babbling between them. In the garden, the newly planted seeds lay waiting in the warm earth, ready to grow despite whatever storms might come. "We should finish the roof," Naomi said at last, "before the spring rains return." Jed nodded, grateful for her practical nature. "Aye, and then maybe you can show me more about them beans and squash." They returned to their tasks, Jed to his hammering, Naomi to her planting, the baby to her new doll. But something had shifted, becoming solid and sure as the ground beneath their feet. Whatever threats gathered on the horizon, they would face them together. The April evening settled soft and warm over the valley as Jed guided his wagon toward town. Naomi sat beside him, the baby nestled in her arms, both dressed in their Sunday best. Light from oil lamps spilled from the newly raised Thompson barn ahead, where fiddle music already floated on the breeze. "You sure about this?" Jed asked quietly, noting how Naomi's fingers worried the edge of her shawl. She nodded, though her spine remained straight as a ramrod. "Your people will never accept us hiding in shadows. The baby needs to grow up walking in daylight." The wagon rolled to a stop among others, parked near the barn. Inside, lanterns cast golden light across rough-hewn beams while paper streamers danced in the spring air. The music paused as Jed helped Naomi down, his large hands steady at her waist. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through prairie. "Grass, land sakes, he really brought her," someone muttered. "And that baby too," another voice added. Jed drew himself up to his full height, 6 feet 4 inches of quiet strength. His presence alone seemed to dare anyone to voice objection. Sarah Thompson, the barn owner's wife, broke the tension by bustling forward. "Welcome. There's punch by the door, and plenty of pie left." She smiled at the baby, who blinked at the lights. "What a pretty little thing. How old now?" 3 months, Naomi answered softly. "She grows strong." More folks drifted over, curiosity winning over caution. The baby drew them like honey draws bees, her dark eyes bright as she cooed at their attention. Women who had been stiff-backed moments before found themselves offering advice about teething and sleeping through the night. The fiddler struck up a lively reel. Couples swirled across the plank floor, skirts swishing like autumn leaves. Naomi swayed slightly to the music, and something in her expression caught the fiddler's eye. During a break, he approached, holding out his instrument. "They say your people make fine music," he said. "Care to show us?" Naomi hesitated, looking to Jed. He nodded encouragement, taking the baby carefully in his arms. Her tiny weight settled against his chest like she belonged there. The first notes Naomi drew from the fiddle were soft as mountain mist. The melody spoke of wind through canyon walls, of mothers singing their children to sleep under star-filled skies. The dancing stopped. People stood transfixed as the song wove around them, bridging worlds they had thought forever separate. When the last note faded, silence held for a heartbeat. Then applause burst forth, genuine and warm. The fiddler shook his head in admiration. "That's real music, ma'am. Real music indeed." The evening flowed easier after that. While Naomi spoke with women about garden planning, Jed stood at the edge of the crowd, rocking the sleeping baby. He caught fragments of conversation. "That way he looks after that child. Never seen Boone so gentle-like. Maybe we were too quick." To judge, as another waltz began, Jed made his way to Naomi. "Reckon I owe you a dance," he said, shifting the baby to one arm and holding out his other hand. Naomi's eyes widened. "I do not know your dances." "Neither do I, truth be told," Jed admitted. "We can learn together." They moved awkwardly at first, Yet's towering frame careful not to step on Naomi's feet while keeping the baby secure. But gradually they found their rhythm, swaying gently as the fiddle sang. The baby slept on, one tiny fist curled in Yet's shirt. Looking up at them, Naomi saw not judgment in the watching eyes, but something softer. For this moment, they were simply a man and woman dancing, a baby dreaming in her father's arms. Her heart swelled with emotions she dared not name. As the music ended, Sarah Thompson approached with a wrapped bundle. "Some of us ladies put together. Some baby things, blankets and such. Growing young guns need plenty." Naomi accepted the gift with quiet dignity. "Thank you." "You are kind." The ride home beneath the star-strewn sky felt different than the journey in. The baby slept in Naomi's arms while crickets chirped their evening song. Neither adult spoke until the cabin came into view, dark against the silver-painted mountains. "Thank you," Naomi said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "for giving us this night, for letting me walk proud among your people." Yet's hands tightened on the reins. "Ain't about letting. You got every right to walk proud anywhere." Still, tonight felt She paused, searching for words. It felt like hope. As they approached the cabin, Naomi gently placed the sleeping baby in Yet's arms. The sight of his large hands cradling her so tenderly caught the last rays of moonlight, a picture of protection that needed no words. Inside, while Jed built up the fire, Naomi unwrapped the gift bundle. Among the blankets lay a small wooden cross on a leather cord, and a note in Sarah Thompson's careful hand. For the little one, may she grow in grace. Naomi touched the cross gently, then looked to where Jed sat by the fire, still holding the baby. In the flickering light, she saw not a feared outsider, but family. Whatever storms gathered on the horizon, this night had given them a taste of peace. Fragile, perhaps, but real as the stars that had witnessed their dance.dawn painted the eastern sky in delicate pinks and golds as Jed stepped onto his cabin's porch, coffee cup warming his hands. The morning after the barn dance felt peaceful, with spring birds calling and new grass pushing through melting snow. Inside, he could hear Naomi humming to the baby as she prepared breakfast. The thunder of hooves shattered the quiet. 6 riders appeared around the bend, their blue uniforms stark against the landscape. Brass, buttons, and rifle barrels caught the morning light. At their head rode a lean officer, his posture rigid as a fence post, eyes cold as winter ice dot. Jed set his cup down slowly. "Naomi," he called through the door, keeping his voice steady. "Stay inside." But she was already in the doorway, the baby held close. Her face went still as stone when she saw the soldiers. The lieutenant reined his horse to a stop, dust settling around the mounted patrol. He surveyed the cabin with calculated disinterest before fixing his gaze on Naomi. "I am Lieutenant Charles Harker," he announced, his words clipped and precise. "I have orders concerning the infant currently in your possession." Jed moved to stand. Between Naomi and the soldiers, "This here's private property, Lieutenant. State your business plain." Harker's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "The child is the offspring of a proven traitor to the United States Army. As such, it falls under military jurisdiction." "That's a lie," Naomi's voice cracked like a whip. "My husband served faithful. He was murdered for speaking truth." "Your husband," Harker said, emphasizing each word, "was executed for passing intelligence to hostile forces. The child, being his issue, is now property of the United States government." "Property?" Yet's hands clenched into fists. "We're talking about a baby girl, not some army mule." Harker dismounted, his movements precise as a clockwork. 2 soldiers followed suit, hands resting on their holsters. "Mr. Boone, I advise you to step aside. This matter doesn't concern you." "Like hell it don't." Jed planted his feet wider. "You ain't taking either of them." The lieutenant's eyes hardened. Harboring a fugitive is a serious offense, one that could see you sharing a cell with your house guests. He glanced at his men. "Sergeant, secure the woman and child." The soldiers advanced. Jed tensed, ready to fight, but felt Naomi's hand on his arm. Her touch was light as a feather, but it held him fast. "No, Jed," she whispered. "Not this way." Her other hand pressed something into his palm, a folded paper, worn soft as buckskin. "The pension document. Hide this. Live even if we do not." "Naomi, I can't let you must." Her eyes met his, fierce with desperate hope. "Truth lives in that paper." "Very well." The soldiers reached the porch. One grabbed Naomi's arm while another tried to take the baby. She resisted instinctively, clutching her child tighter. "That's resistance," Harker called out. "Arrest her." "Wait," Naomi's voice trembled. "Let me hold her, please. She'll cry less." Something in her tone made even Harker pause. He nodded curtly. Jed stood frozen, the document burning in his palm, as the soldiers escorted Naomi toward their horses. The baby, sensing tension, began to whimper. Naomi murmured soft Apache words, swaying gently as she walked. "Lieutenant?" Jed called, his voice rough. "You got no right to this. That child ain't Army property. She's a freeborn American citizen." Harker mounted his horse, looking down his nose at Jed. Your sentiment is noted, Mr. Boone. I suggest you remember your place before you share their fate. They lifted Naomi onto a horse, one soldier mounting behind her. The baby's cries grew louder, piercing the morning air like arrows. Jed, Naomi called back, her voice carrying across the yard. Remember your promise. Guard what I gave you. He could only watch as the patrol turned their horses, taking Naomi and the baby with them. Their hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving nothing but dust and silence. Jed stood on his porch long after they vanished, the pension paper clutched in his fist. Rage burned in his chest, hot as forge fire. But beneath it lay something deeper. A cold certainty that he had failed them both. Inside the cabin, evidence of their presence mocked him. The baby's doll lay beside the hearth, Naomi's shawl draped over a chair. The wooden cross from the barn dance caught morning light, throwing shadows like tears on the wall. He carefully smoothed the crumpled document, reading the formal script. That proved a scout's loyal service and a lieutenant's lies. This paper could save them, but only if he kept it safe. Only if he lived to use it. Naomi's last words echoed in his mind. Guard what I gave you. He had protected neither her nor the baby. But, by God, he would protect this truth she'd entrusted to him. Even if it cost him everything he had. The morning. Birds still sang outside, oblivious to the tragedy that had just unfolded. But Jed heard only the baby's fading cries and Naomi's final whisper, both cutting deeper than any knife could reach. Night fell heavy and cold over Yet's cabin. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing dancing shadows across walls that felt emptier than they had in months. He sat in his chair, the one Naomi had draped with the blanket she'd woven, and unfolded the pension paper with trembling hands. The document's official lettering spelled out the truth in stark black ink. Lieutenant James Tenaya, Scout for the United States Army, had served with distinction. Commendations lined the page, each one a testament to a man who'd bridged two worlds with honor. At the bottom, 3 officers' signatures validated his loyal service and his rightful pension. Yet's rifle leaned in the corner, cleaned and loaded. His fingers itched to grab it, to saddle his horse and chase down those soldiers. He could track them easy enough. 6 horses left clear signs, and he knew these mountains better than any army man. But Naomi's voice whispered in his memory, soft as evening wind, "The Lord is my shepherd." Her quiet faith had filled this cabin, changing it from a mere shelter to something like home. Would she want him to answer violence with violence? The baby's doll lay on the floor where it had fallen. Jed picked it up, remembering how little Dawn's tiny fingers had clutched at it. His chest tightened with an ache deeper than any physical wound. "No," he said aloud, his voice rough in the quiet cabin. "Not with a rifle." He tucked the pension paper carefully into his shirt and doused. The fire. Outside, his horse nickered softly as he saddled up. The moon hung full and bright, lighting his way down the mountain trail toward town. Most windows were dark when he arrived, but lamplight still glowed in Reverend Matthew's study behind the church. Jed tied his horse and knocked on the door. "Who's there?" called a cautious voice. "Jed Boone. Need to talk, Reverend. It's about Naomi." The door opened, revealing the pastor's concerned face. "I heard soldiers were seen heading toward your place. Come in, brother." Inside, Reverend Matthews listened intently as Jed explained everything, from finding Naomi and the baby to their seizure that morning. When Jed produced the pension paper, the pastor studied it carefully under his lamp. "This is legitimate," he said finally. "These signatures, I recognize Colonel Brandon's name. He commands the fort 60 miles south. Reckon that's where they took them, most likely." The Reverend drummed his fingers on his desk. "We should talk to Samuel at the general store. He's got influence with the territorial governor's office." Despite the late hour, they found Samuel Miller still awake, doing his books. The shopkeeper had been one of the first to warm to Naomi after her scripture recitation in church. His wife had even given her fabric for the baby's clothes. "This is wrong," Samuel declared, after hearing their story. "That lieutenant's acting without proper authority. A pension document like this, with these signatures, it proves her husband's loyalty. The child can't be army property if her father died an honorable soldier. But will folks believe us? Jed asked. 3 men against an army lieutenant? Samuel's eyes sparked with determination. Not just 3 men. Remember the barn dance? Half the town saw Naomi there, saw her playing that fiddle, saw how she cared for that baby. They know she's no threat. Brother Boone, Reverend Matthews, added, I've watched this town change since you brought Naomi to church. People who once turned away now greet her. Children waved to her. Even old Mrs. Thompson, who lost a son to Apache raids years back, gave her preserves last week. Jed remembered the small kindnesses that had begun to appear. A loaf of fresh bread left on his porch. Women stopping to admire the baby. Men touching their hats to Naomi in the street. Small things, but they meant something. What do you propose? He asked. Samuel leaned forward. First light tomorrow, I'll send my boy with messages. We'll gather everyone who's willing to stand as witness to Naomi's character. The Reverend can testify to her Christian faith. I'll write to my cousin at the territorial office, and I'll draft letters to Colonel Brandon and the fort chaplain, Reverend Matthews added. The pension paper proves Lieutenant Harker acted without proper cause. The Army takes a dim view of officers exceeding their authority. Hope stirred in Yet's chest, small but fierce, like the first spark of a fire. It wasn't the quick justice his rifle might have brought, but it was something stronger. Something Naomi would approve of. There's more at stake here than just one woman and child, Samuel continued. This is about what kind of town we're going to be. What kind of neighbors we choose to be. The Reverend nodded solemnly. The good? Book says we're to care for widows and orphans. It doesn't specify what tribe they come from. They talked into the night making plans. By the time Jed rode home, a strategy had taken shape. It wouldn't be quick or easy, but it would be right. And he wouldn't be fighting alone. Dawn was breaking as he reached his cabin. The empty room still ached with absence, but now that ache held purpose. He carefully stored the pension paper in his mother's old Bible, the safest place he knew. Hold. On Naomi, he whispered. Hold on, little Dawn. We're coming and we're bringing the truth with us. The morning sun touched the eastern mountains, painting them gold. Somewhere out there, Naomi was probably singing softly to her baby, keeping faith alive. Jed squared his shoulders and began preparing for the day ahead. There was much to be done, and hope had given him strength to do it. The morning sun barely warmed their backs as Jed led the small group down the muddy trail. Behind him rode Reverend Matthews, Samuel Miller, and 3 other townsfolk who had witnessed Naomi's gentle presence in their community. Their horses picked their way carefully through puddles left by 2 days of relentless rain. Yet's coat was still damp from the previous night's downpour. The pension paper, safely wrapped in oilcloth, rested inside his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Each hoofbeat brought them closer to the fort, and to Naomi and Little Dawn. Samuel Miller pulled his horse alongside Yet's. Weather's clearing. Some, he offered, gesturing at breaks in the clouds. Might make better time today. Jed nodded, his jaw set. The slow progress had tested his patience, but he understood the need for caution. One wrong step on these treacherous trails could lame a horse or worse. Still, every delay felt like a betrayal of the trust Naomi had placed in him. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses near a creek, swollen with rainwater. While the others ate jerky and hardtack, Jed walked a few paces away. The rushing water reminded him of Naomi's voice reciting psalms, steady and clear as a mountain stream. That evening, they made camp in a sheltered hollow. The spring chill crept through their blankets as darkness fell. Jed sat apart from the others, staring up at stars that peeked through scattered clouds. The same stars would be shining over the fort where Naomi and Little Dawn were held. Lord, he whispered, surprising himself with the sound of his own voice. Been a long time since I talked to you proper. He'd paused, struggling with words that felt rusty from disuse. Don't rightly know if you're listening, but Naomi, she believes. Never lost faith, even after everything. His voice trailed off as, He remembered her quiet strength, how she'd stood in church that Sunday morning, head held high. The memory gave him courage to continue. "Help me do right by her and that baby," he prayed. "Give me wisdom to speak truth to power, and—" He swallowed hard. "Keep them safe till I get there." "Amen," came a soft voice behind him. Reverend Matthews settled nearby, offering a cup of coffee. First prayer's always the hardest. Jed accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. They sat in companionable silence as the camp settled, for the night dawn broke gray and cold over the fort's stone walls. Yet's group approached the heavy wooden gates, where 2 sentries stood at attention. Their rifles gleamed dully in the early light. "State your business?" the older sentry barked, eyeing the mud-splattered travelers with suspicion. Jed straightened in his saddle, drawing himself up to his full height. "We're here to see Colonel Brandon. Got urgent business concerning Lieutenant Harker's recent actions," the younger sentry sneered. "Colonel don't see every drifter with a complaint. Then he'll want to see this." Jed carefully withdrew the wrapped pension paper. "Official Army document concerning James Tenaya and his widow." The name caused a slight shift in the older sentry's stance. He stepped closer, studying Yet's face. "The Apache scout's widow? The one Harker brought in?" "The same." Reverend Matthews spoke up, his clerical collar lending authority to his words. "We have evidence of Lieutenant Harker's misconduct in this matter." The sentries exchanged glances. The older one nodded slightly. "Wait here." Minutes stretched like hours as they sat their horses before the gate. Yet's mount pawed restlessly at the muddy ground. Finally, the sentry returned with a sergeant, who introduced himself as Matthews, no relation to the Reverend. "Colonel Brandon." "We'll see 2 of you," the sergeant announced. "Choose quick. The rest of you can water your horses at the trough there." Jed and the Reverend dismounted, following the sergeant through the gate. The fort's parade ground was a churned mess of mud and patches of melting snow. Soldiers went about their morning duties, many casting curious looks at the visitors. They were led to a wooden building with a small sign marking it as headquarters. Inside, the air was warm from a pot-bellied stove. A clerk scratched away at papers, barely glancing up as they entered. Colonel Brandon's office door stood open. The commander himself stood at a window, hands clasped behind his back. He was older than Jed had expected, with gray threading his beard and deep lines around his eyes. "Gentlemen," he said, turning to face them. "Sergeant Matthews tells me you have concerns about Lieutenant Harker's recent actions regarding the Apache woman and child?" "Yes, sir," Jed replied, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "Lieutenant Harker took them without cause or proper authority. We have proof of their right to live free." The colonel's eyebrows rose slightly. "Strong accusations, Mr. Boone, sir." "Jedediah Boone? And you, Reverend?" "Matthews, Colonel. Of the Pine Valley Church." Colonel Brandon gestured to 2 straight-back chairs. "Sit. Tell me why you've ridden 2 days through miserable weather to challenge one of my officers." Jed remained standing, though the Reverend sat. With careful movements, he unwrapped a pension paper and placed it on the colonel's desk. "This document proves James Tenaya died a loyal soldier of the United States Army. His widow and child are entitled to his pension and protection." The colonel picked up the paper, studying it in silence. His eyes narrowed at the signatures. "These men were my colleagues," he said finally. "Good officers, all of them." "Then you know the document's genuine," Reverend Matthews said quietly. "I do." Colonel Brandon set the paper down. "What I don't know is why Lieutenant Harker wasn't informed of its existence when he took the woman and child into custody." "Because Naomi Mrs. Tenaya feared it would be destroyed," Jed explained. "She entrusted it to me for safekeeping." "I see." The colonel's gaze was sharp. "And your interest in this matter, Mr. Boone?" "I gave them shelter when I found them near death. In the snow. They've lived under my protection these past months. The town knows them, accepts them." "It's true, Colonel," the Reverend added. "Mrs. Tenaya has become part of our community. She attends services, helps her neighbors. The child is beloved by all who know her. Colonel Brandon walked to his window. Again, hands clasped behind his back. The morning light cast his shadow long across the office floor. Lieutenant Harker claimed she was a threat to security, that the child needed to be placed in proper care. Sir? Yet's voice was firm but respectful. I brought witnesses who will testify to Naomi's character. Good people who've seen her live. In peace, raise her child with dignity. She's no threat, just a widow trying to honor her husband's memory and give their daughter a future. The colonel turned, studying Yet's face. You speak of her with great conviction, Mr. Boone. I speak truth, sir. Nothing more. A long moment passed. Outside, they could hear the ordinary sounds of Fort Life marching feet, shouted orders. The blacksmith's hammer. Finally, Colonel Brandon nodded. I'll speak with Lieutenant Harker, he said, and I'll see Mrs. Tenaya myself. In the meantime, you and your companions are welcome to rest in the visitors' quarters. Sir, Jed stepped forward. I'd like to see them. Make sure they're well. The colonel considered this request. Very well. Sergeant Matthews will escort you to the women's quarters after the noon meal. Until then, I suggest you all get some rest. You look like you've had a hard ride. They saluted and left the office, hope rising cautiously in Yet's chest. In a few hours, he would see Naomi and little Dawn. The pension paper lay safe in Colonel Brandon's hands. Now all they could do was wait and pray. Sergeant Matthews led them through the fort's muddy pathways toward the commander's office. The morning sun had burned away the early mist, revealing the full bustle of military life. Soldiers drilled on the parade ground while work details hauled supplies between buildings. The scents of coffee and wood smoke drifted from the mess hall. Inside headquarters, they found Lieutenant Harker already waiting in Colonel Brandon's office. The lieutenant's perfectly pressed uniform and polished boots stood in stark contrast to their travel-worn appearance. His lip curled slightly at their entrance. Ah, our concerned citizens return, he said, voice dripping with disdain. Come to spin more tailies about your Apache woman. Lieutenant, Colonel Brandon's sharp tone cut through the air. You will maintain proper decorum in this office. The colonel gestured for everyone to sit. Jed remained standing, his height making him tower over the seated lieutenant. Reverend Matthews settled into a chair, while the shopkeeper, Thomas Wilson, stood near the door. Now then, Colonel Brandon began, lifting the pension document. I've examined this thoroughly. The signatures are genuine, the dates align with our records, and the service history is clear. James Tenaya served honorably as a scout for 5 years before his death. Sir, Lieutenant Harker interrupted, surely you can't trust a document. That was concealed. I can trust my own eyes, Lieutenant, the colonel replied firmly. And the signatures of 3 officers I served with personally. He turned to Jed. Mr. Boone, please call in your other witnesses. One by one, townspeople entered to testify. Mrs. Miller, the baker's wife, spoke of Naomi's gentle ways with children. The blacksmith described her quiet dignity in the face of prejudice. Each account painted a picture of a woman who had earned respect through faith and perseverance. She stands in church every Sunday, Reverend Matthews added, and knows Scripture. Better than most of my congregation. Her faith has strengthened ours. Lieutenant Harker shifted impatiently. Colonel, surely you see this is all sentiment. The woman's husband was executed for treason, was he? Colonel Brandon's voice was steel. Because this document shows otherwise. It proves he died in service, Lieutenant. The execution you speak of is not in any official record I can find. Color drained from Harker's face. Sir, furthermore, the colonel continued, I've received telegrams from Fort Apache confirming James Tenaya's loyal service. The pension was approved and recorded. Someone deliberately buried these facts. His gaze pinned the lieutenant. Someone who perhaps had reason to want certain scouts forgotten. The office fell silent. Even the scratch of the clerk's pen in the outer room had stopped. Bring Mrs. Tenaya, Colonel Brandon ordered. Now. Minutes later, Naomi entered, holding little Dawn close. Her face was drawn, but her back was straight. The baby burbled softly, reaching toward Jed as they passed. Mrs. Tenaya, the colonel said gently, I owe you an apology on behalf of the United States Army. Your husband served honorably, and you have been grievously wronged. Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. My husband loved this land. He believed in serving both his people and yours with honor. The pension will be reinstated immediately, Colonel Brandon continued. You and your child are free citizens, under the Army's protection. He turned to Lieutenant Harker. Lieutenant, you are relieved of duty pending investigation. Report to the adjutant's office. Harker shot to his feet, face mottled with rage. Sir, you can't possibly. I can, and I have. Dismissed, Lieutenant. The lieutenant's boots clicked sharply as he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. In the silence that followed, Little Don reached again for Jed, who stepped forward uncertainly. Colonel Brandon nodded slightly. Go to him, Mrs. Tenaya. I believe you have people here who care deeply for your welfare. Naomi moved into Yet's embrace, the baby between them. His arms encircled them both, and he felt her trembling despite her outward calm. Your husband's name will be cleared in all records, the colonel said. I'll see to it personally. The monthly pension will be paid, with all back amounts owed. He smiled slightly, though I suspect money matters less to you than justice. Thank you, Naomi whispered. For believing truth. Truth has its own power, Colonel Brandon replied. As does love. His eyes moved meaningfully between Naomi. Jed, I believe you have a home waiting, Mrs. Tenaya. Don't let us keep you from it. The townspeople gathered close as they left the office, offering quiet congratulations and support. Reverend Matthews led a brief prayer of thanksgiving right there in the fort's muddy yard. Heads bowed under the spring sun, Jed kept his arm around Naomi as they walked toward the gates. Little Don had fallen asleep against his chest, one tiny hand curled in his shirt. Behind them, they could hear Colonel Brandon already issuing orders for their escort home. Justice had been won. But Jed knew the greater victory was in the family he now held close, protected at last by truth and love. The spring sun warmed their backs as they rode toward home. Naomi sat sideways in front of Jed on his horse. Little Dawn nestled safely. In a sling across her chest, the townsfolk formed a protective circle around them. Reverend Matthews, Thomas Wilson, and 3 other men who'd stood witness at the fort, hooves clopped steadily on the packed earth. And the familiar mountains grew closer with each mile. Jed could feel Naomi's tension slowly easing as the distance from the fort increased. The baby slept peacefully, rocked by the horse's gentle motion. When dusk approached, Reverend Matthews guided them to his home, a modest white house with a neat garden. His wife Martha welcomed them with fresh bread and stew, her eyes kind as she fussed over little Dawn Dot at the supper table. Naomi's quiet voice rose in prayer. Great Spirit, Father God, we thank you for these friends who stood for truth. Bless their homes as they blessed mine. Watch over their children as they protected my child. Her words, blending Apache tradition with Christian faith, brought tears. To Martha's eyes, they departed early the next morning. The townsfolk rode with them until the creek crossing, where paths divided. Thomas Wilson tipped his hat. You've got good neighbors now, Mrs. Tenaya. Don't forget it. Reverend Matthews added, our church doors are always open to you. All of you. His meaningful look at Jed carried acceptance and invitation as their companion turned toward town. Jed and Naomi continued alone on Mountain Trail. Little Dawn woke, cooing at a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. The familiar peaks drew closer, painted with spring greenery near the last bend before home. Naomi touched Yet's arm. Stop, please. When he reined in, she turned to face him fully, eyes bright with tears. That night in the snow, you could have left us. Many would have. But you chose mercy, and now my daughter lives. We live. Yet's throat tightened. He remembered that first cry in the darkness, the bundle by the sage bush, the choice that had changed everything. Reckon mercy chose me, he said softly. Brought me a family I never knew I needed. Naomi smiled through her tears, and little Dawn reached up to pat his cheek with a tiny hand. Together, they rode the final stretch toward home the next morning. Jed stood in the yard, marking out lines for the cabin addition with wooden stakes and twine. The spring breeze carried the scent of sage and pine as he measured carefully. Planning room enough for Naomi and little Dawn to have proper sleeping quarters. He paused to watch Naomi, kneeling in the freshly turned earth near the cabin door. Her fingers worked methodically, planting corn seeds in neat rows. Beside the vegetables, she scattered handfuls of wildflower seeds, purple lupin and golden sunflowers that would bloom through summer. The sight of her making the land her own stirred something deep in his chest. "These flowers," she explained, catching his gaze, "will remind us of God's beauty, even on hard days." Her hands patted the soil with gentle certainty, as if pressing hope itself into the ground. Inside the cabin, little Dawn slept peacefully in the cradle Jed had crafted from pine boards. He'd spent evenings smoothing the wood until it felt like silk, adding careful rockers and a small cross carved at the head. The baby's soft breathing filled the quiet space with contentment. As dusk settled over the valley, they gathered inside. The iron stove crackled with warmth, and lamplight cast a golden glow across the wooden walls. Naomi had hung simple curtains at the windows and placed a colorful blanket on Yet's old chair. Small touches that made the cabin feel like home. They sat together at the table, their hands joining naturally. Yet's large, callous fingers enclosed Naomi's smaller ones as they bowed their heads. The words came easier now, after all they'd faced together. "Lord," Jed began, his deep voice gentle, "thank you for bringing us together as family. Watch over this home and the life we're building." Naomi's voice joined his, weaving English with Apache words of gratitude. Little Dawn stirred in her cradle, adding a soft coo to their prayer. Morning light crept into the valley, touching the cabin's weathered logs with gold. It spilled across Naomi's garden, where tender shoots pushed through the soil. The dawn painted the whole homestead in fresh colors, as if the land itself celebrated this new beginning. Inside, the small family slept peacefully, their faith and love as solid as the mountains standing guard around them. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.